Batman. I love geese.
What is the last time you ever thought of making a YouTube series or you attempted a shoddy podcast? The opportunity that YouTube can give to what types of videos you can make is super vast. And that's true for the most part, except for the demonetization. Regardless, these communities that have spawned from YouTube and other video sharing platforms like Newgrounds and Twitter are something you could never really find anywhere else. And whether that's for the better or the worse, these social media platforms have spawned a completely different category of horror, not typical from traditional horror.
Is there any more coffee?
The most popular forms of internet horror being ARGs and Creepypastas. Now you may already know where I'm going with this, but I've always been fascinated with these subgenres of horror. And a question that has intrigued me recently is, which is a better form of horror? Now, two things I should preface before we should get into this. One, this is a purely subjective opinion. You can honestly like whatever you want, but at the end of the day, I'm right. And two, the meaning of the term creepypasta and ARG is very vast. Hell, some of these that I'm going to list are considered both ARGs and creepypastas, but here's how I'll separate them. If it's a story that is more widely known as a written form, it's a creepypasta. And if it's a story more widely known as a video series, it's an ARG. With that said, that brings me to my first look at these two groups of horror as a whole. We will first start off with the creepypastas. I will start this off by defining what a creepypasta is exactly. A creepypasta is defined as a horror-related legend which has been shared around the internet. Now, the wiki for it also says that it has become a catch-all term for anything horror-based on the internet, but like I said earlier for this, I'm mostly basing it off of it being a written internet forum, as that's how most creepypastas started. The wiki also says that creepypastas are usually short, paranormal, user-generated stories intended to creep out readers. Now, if you are wondering why it is specifically called a creepypasta, in case you don't know, it's based on the term copypasta, which is a chunk of text that's usually spammed or spread around the internet. Copypastas were sort of an early form of memes, as they were pretty popular in the 2000s on the internet. But essentially, a creepypasta is that, but it's a horror story. The first creepypastas to go around the internet surfaced 20 years ago, and it is widely regarded that a story known as Ted the Caver, written in 2001, was the first creepypasta ever written. And I'll actually admit, Ted the Caver is a pretty good story. Now, I won't go into the depths and crevices of this story, but it's a pretty simple telling of two cavers digging out a narrow point in a cave, and when they ultimately get across the shaft, the two see something that ultimately leads them leaving the cave for good. The execution of its climax is pretty good, and it's not over the top at all. It stays realistic and within the normal boundaries of human fear, which is unfortunately not something you'll see often later on with more of these creepypastas. But there's no big scary monster they have to fight off like it's some cliche Marvel movie. There's no big reveal or lore to the story. In fact, it kind of leaves off at a cliffhanger. The story explores the fear of the unknown, and that's why it's a good creepypasta. And people have asked the author to finish writing the story since it leaves off at a cliffhanger, but the author has gone on to state that he doesn't want to finish it and that he thinks it's fine where it stands, which I had to say is a really good move on the author. Now, even after Ted the Caver was written, the idea of a creepypasta hadn't become a viral form of storytelling quite immediately, but there were a few more that were written in the mid to late 2000s. Ones like Jeff the Killer, a story about a kid who killed his family over being bullied and suppressed. I'll talk more about this one later, as it's not a great story, but it holds one of the greatest internet mysteries to its name. Polybius, an arcade machine that caused insomnia, night terrors, and seizures to whoever played it. This one actually started as an urban legend in the 90s, but later on got turned into a creepypasta. And The Rake, which is about a creature, I guess. It's like a human predator, but that's really all there is to the story. It's also not very great. With these earlier stories written over the course of a decade, it set in motion one of the first waves of internet horror. Over the next few years, especially around the turn of the decade, a ton more creepypastas were written all over web forums and documents across the internet. It became the most popular form of horror, and hell, I would go as far to say that they were partially the reason some of the most popular YouTubers today are famous. A lot more creepypastas started to spring up around 2011 and 2012. Some of the most famous ones were Slenderman, The Russian Sleep Experiment, Candle Cove, Squidward Suicide, Herobrine, Lavender Town, and Sonic EXE. But recently, the genre of creepypastas has started to die out in recent years. The last true creepypasta that got popular, I would say, was probably Siren Head in 2020, which is not a very good creepypasta, but trust me, we're going to get into some that are much worse. Now, some of you 2000s kids, you nerds so call yourself, might have gotten a nostalgic tingle go up your spine when you heard me mention all of these. But I'm here to poop on your party. Most of your beloved creepypastas suck. I must first disclaim that I understand that the people who wrote a lot of these creepypastas aren't literary expert writers by any means, and I understand that, but I do not think it takes away from the over-glorification a lot of these creepypastas get. They do not deserve it. So I'll get into why a lot of these creepypastas aren't very good with my main point. You know how I mentioned earlier that showing what's behind the backstage on what a monster is a bad form of horror writing? Yeah, well, a lot of these creepypastas do that. Many of them are just jump scare based, or they write a really bad backstory to the character they're talking about. Many creepypastas will usually write out a backstory for a character or film as some form of lost media, usually implying that upon the creation of a cursed relic, the creators of the film sought to never reveal the cursed piece and cast it into the flames of nothingness, as it causes rickets to anyone who sees their eyes upon it. That prompt could have worked for like 95% of these. And it is such an overdone prompt as well. It's been done in movies to death as well. So why do we need that in internet horror? I will now proceed to list off some of the most popular creepypastas and show you the cliches and bad parts about its writing. Squidward Suicide is a cursed tape of Squidward offing himself. Herobrine, a Minecraft world haunted by a sentient entity. Candle Cove, more lost media that's cursed. However, I'll give the creator a bit more credit on this one, as there's more effort into the quality of the supposed lost media, but unfortunately, yet again, it's just another cursed piece of film. Sonic.exe, a cursed version of Sonic the Hedgehog. Wow! Suicide Mouse, yet again another cursed tape. This one's about Mickey Mouse. Smile Dog, haunted picture of a smiling dog. Dead Bart, last cursed Simpsons episode. Well, no wonder 2010's horror was so bad. Like I said, these creepypastas go straight into explaining the origin of the monster. While they're not super in-depth about it because creepypastas are usually short, it's still an achievable concept. I mean, like I said, Ted the Caver does do this pretty well, along with a couple of others. Another thing that most creepypasta characters have, if you look, is that they will all either have big eyes or big mouths. For scary aspects, I don't know. The only exception for this I can think of is Slenderman.
Kill yourself!
If you notice though, most ARG characters usually have somewhat simplistic designs and shapes because a lot of them don't rely on face horror to convey their scariness. Compare that to creepypasta characters. Most of them look like they're screaming, "Please think I'm scary!" Most of these stories lack the depth needed to build up the horror to any climax or ambiguity, as they all simply rely on shock value or jump scares as a cheap crutch to be a horror icon. And I get that I may be bagging on these creepypastas too much, and while I think there are a lot of issues with many of them, some of them do open doors for some more interesting mysteries. You may have heard me mention Jeff the Killer earlier, and while I stated that it isn't a very good story, there is one big question about it that has been looming over the internet for several years now, with leads going back almost 20 years. No one knows where the image of him came from. In 2015, the YouTuber Scare Theater did an interview with the creator of the creepypasta, and he asked the creator where he found the image of Jeff the Killer, and he said something along the lines of, I made it myself with a latex mask, I don't know. But if you actually look around a little bit, you'll find pictures of Jeff the Killer on YouTube from all the way back in 2007, which means he didn't create the photo originally, and people found more postings of him from even further back all the way to 2005. And with that started an entire community that started searching for the origin.
I am putting up $10,000 to find the origin point of one of the most elusive pieces of creepypasta lost media in general. I don't know if we'll ever find this. I honestly have probably given up a lot of hope for it in general.
I'll add $1,000 to the prize pot that Mudahar is offering. It's not a whole lot, but I'm not as rich as Mudahar, so it's something.
Especially since this image was found on a Japanese video, so if he had made it, this image should have been circulating for a long time.
Different users across the internet had to go interview people from way back in the day, from the early internet, to try and see if maybe they knew the source of the image either. Some of them said it's a heavily photoshopped picture of someone, which is partially true. It is a photoshopped picture, but the person they said was photoshopped has been debunked. Some said it came from a Japanese TV show from 1999. Some even said it was a meme in the early 2000s. But even with these early users claiming they know the origin, they could not find a picture of it either. Looking back at the oldest forum of this photo from July 2005, you'll see that the photo has a slightly altered origin, but it still doesn't give us much info. The more bizarre part is that people in the comments section of the picture stated that the original version is the scariest. That's vague, but now that makes me want to know the origin even more. Well, these are all the debunked photos. Is this woman the origin? No, probably not. These are ones we aren't even sure of yet. This guy that had a photo gallery of the picture claims that there were actually multiple angles of the picture taken. Well, that's a breakthrough. Too bad he doesn't have the pictures either. What the fuck is this? It's like you're so close to finding the original, but one small cease of contact is stopping you. To this day, there are still not too many solid leads. The closest one is of a girl known as Mariko, and if the original photo is her, then that means the origin of the image is likely never going to be found. The story of Mariko is a bit long, but essentially she deleted a lot of her photos because people kept harassing her, and it's thought that maybe one of the photos she deleted was the unedited Jeff the Killer photo. The search for Jeff the Killer is so big that there is an $11,400 bounty for the original image out there right now. With this said, I think the true horror and mystery of creepypastas is the unknown. We don't know what the original photo of Jeff the Killer looks like, but it's super enticing to imagine what it really does look like. Supposedly, the original photo is scarier than any other version, which is a mystery that just begs the human mind to wonder. And that is the true work of creepypastas. Many of these searches of their origins tell a bigger story than the actual written tale itself, as many people search in old areas unvisited for years, and many find big leads there, and many come to dead ends. And Jeff the Killer isn't the only unknown photo origin out there. No one knows the origin of Smile Dog either. Now, there are two versions of Smile Dog. I don't know what the hell this second version is. Everyone keeps saying it's the original, but people have sort of found the origin for this photo already pretty easily. But I'm talking about this first version, as it is a mystery as to who or where it was taken at the moment. Isn't known. The same is also with the original Backrooms photo, which is an ARG that originally started off as a creepypasta, but we'll talk about that later on. No one knows where this photo was taken either. If you do know anything about these three images, please contact me or one of these subreddits for more info. Now, to wrap this section up, I will title one creepypasta as the worst and one as the best. So the worst creepypasta is Sonic.exe. This isn't much of a debate despite how many bad creepypastas there are, but Sonic.exe is just the epitome of bad 2010s horror. Cheap jump scares, shitty common plot, and again with the damn eyes. Wow, they're big and red. Not like every damn horror character has already done that. The Sonic fanbase is actually one of the few fan bases where the more obsessed you become with the game, the less valid your opinion about the game series becomes. So to any of the Sonic stans in the comments telling me, well, you just don't understand the true lost nature of the media Sonic.exe portrays, so you're ignorant. You can go back to prison from where you came for doing your mom. The best creepypasta is, to no one's surprise, Ted the Caver. Ted the Caver definitely has the best potential out of any creepypasta besides the Image and Origin creepypastas to be the most mysterious and eerie out of all of them. It has a solid build-up to its story, and near the end, you're not quite sure what you just witnessed. It's a good creepypasta. I recommend you go read it. Before we move on, I want to give 2 honorable mentions to some other creepypastas that I have heard of or read that I do think are decent, but I don't think make it to the top spot. The first one is Ben Drowned. Now, Ben Drowned is not really that scary of a story, but I do like its little character development it has going on. It's a bit different from some of the other ones. I would at least give it a read. It's not amazing, but it is, I think, better than some of the other ones. Now, the other creepypasta I want to mention is Boraska, I think it's pronounced. I have not fully read this one, so I can't really give it a top spot, but my god, it's fucked up. I can't really say too much because I don't want to spoil it, but if you remember, I mentioned the fact that whenever you reveal the curtain behind a monster, it kind of ruins the horror. This is sort of the opposite, actually, and it kind of defies that almost. I would recommend you read it, as I'm about to probably read it after I'm done editing this video, but with that, that's all the honorable mentions. And that wraps up the creepypasta side of things. Now on to ARGs. An ARG is defined as an alternate reality game, which is also what it stands for. ARGs typically are recorded video narratives that use the real world for storytelling. Now, a big difference I would say divides creepypastas and ARGs. ARGs don't necessarily have to be horror-based, although most of them are. But if you want an example of an ARG that isn't entirely horror-based, Skycorp Home Video is a good example. It still has horror aspect to it, but it definitely leans more to the comedic side of things. Another name ARGs go by is analog horror, which is just kind of a term for found footage horror, yet again, or sort of multiple perspective recording is another way I can put it, but for this video I'll just be referring to them as ARGs. Now, the origin of ARGs isn't as clear-cut as the origins of a creepypasta. I've seen people say that the first one was known as The Beast, that was created by Microsoft themselves. However, I wouldn't consider this to be an ARG really, as it was just promotional material for a documentary. However, if you want an opinion from me, I would probably say the first forms of a modern ARG that you can find would probably be Alan Tutorial, started in 2011. Jesus Christ, it really has been a long time on this platform. Or possibly Salad Fingers from 2004.
Something about this isn't right. You're half my age.
It isn't really as clear-cut of an ARG per se, but it uses aspects from the real world to tell its story, so I think it's within the realm of possibility for consideration. However, I would say the first popular ARG would be Local 58, which started in 2015, and it was actually created by the same guy that created Candle Cove, which I mentioned with our creepypastas. Local 58 is basically, from what I can gather from it, a propaganda TV channel for insomnia, and about the moon brainwashing people. So that's... wow, that's a thing. But with that, for the next few years, the idea of an ARG hadn't quite blown up yet, but a lot more still popped up, like the Walden Files and Gemini Entertainment. But in 2021, that all changed. An ARG known as the Mandela Catalog, not to be confused with the Mandela Effect, took the internet by storm. With that, there were several more ARGs that followed along with it, such as the Backrooms, Vita Carnus, and Maple County, which is a spin-off of the Mandela Catalog. And other than that, here we are, we reached the modern day. So with that, let me get into my issues with most of these ARGs. Now, I will admit that the negatives of ARGs are not nearly as bad as creepypastas, but I still have a few things to point out that are a big problem with a lot of ARGs. First one I'll mention is kind of the same problem with creepypastas, that a lot of ARGs follow a similar premise. That premise being of some kind of sentient entity invading the planet, or of an evil corporation trying to take over the planet. Here I have listed some of the most popular ARGs. These are the ones that don't use that premise. My other issue with ARGs is that quite a few of them over-explain things or make the story way too complicated to understand for what it is. An example of one I will give is an ARG known as Monument Mythos. The simplest way I can explain this ARG is that there is a parallel universe where world monuments are sentient demonic entities that need to be fed to people to be replenished. But that still doesn't really explain the series. This series is fucking lunacy. There is so much insanity in the story, like where the Statue of Freedom kills dozens of people to wear their skin, blast that cuts off your head and causes you to become a giant floating skull, trees that cause you to go through interdimensional travel, and a fucking sentient fallen angel comprised of a bunch of dead soldiers that sets out to have an ultimate final battle with the Statue of Freedom, which causes a multi-dimensional horned serpent to break through the Earth's crust, causing the Earth to explode. What? I think the biggest issue with this is that it's not even a bad story. Like, by this point, I just have to be impressed at the ideas that the creator had in mind for this ARG. I think the problem here is that this being an ARG doesn't do this series justice. This needs to be like a book or something. Ultimately, the format of an ARG just doesn't do that great of an explanation on everything that happens in the story, because it's not really told in much of a linear format. And I mean, maybe that was what the creator had set in mind, but I overall would say that the way Monument Mythos' story is laid out with this ARG format doesn't help fully explain everything. Like I said, this should be like a book, because holy shit, this sounds like the most badass story ever told. It's just unfortunate that to understand all of it, you need to recount a lot of things throughout the series to build up a massive timeline of the true scale of this story. Another ARG I will bring up that just has a hard time explaining its message or story overall is one I mentioned earlier, the Mandela Catalog. Its premise actually sounds kind of cool. Initially in the Bible, an angel was supposed to come down to Earth to tell a group of shepherds about the birth of Christ. But instead, the devil came to Earth first to flourish off the weak mind of the human soul and overthrow Jesus, therefore causing the Earth to be overthrown by demons to kill people at their own liking. Now that's cool and whatnot, but the issue with the Mandela Catalog, especially with its earlier episodes, is that there isn't really a sense of direction in the beginning. There are a lot of bad, unnecessary attempts at horror in the earlier episodes, and not enough storytelling really. A lot of times, a character will be like, "When I was 4 years old, something happened that I could not get out of my head. I walked downstairs one night to get a glass of milk, and when I turned to go back upstairs, the man with the black face looked at me through the door, and he told me, 'Let me into the house, please.' And that's when at that moment, I realized that it was just no man. It was a police sketch from the 2000s! Oh my god! And that wasn't it, because Germa was also there. My guess for why some scenes in the series like this exist is probably because going into the series, I imagine the creator probably had a few key scenes he had in mind to play out for the series, but didn't necessarily connect them too well. However, the creator, Alex Kister, has gone on to state that he isn't too proud of his early work either. And in fact, he made a parody of his own series to kind of admirably make fun of it, which is why I'm really only critiquing the earlier parts of this series, as its newer episodes of the Mandela Catalog are a lot more fleshed out, and there's not nearly as much of Germa Trollface. So that's awesome. Before I reach my final verdict on what I think the worst or best ARG is, I do want to discuss some ARGs that do a really good job in encapsulating good horror and storytelling. The first one I briefly want to discuss is Petscop. Petscop is a sort of game created to show what, child abuse is like. Watching the beginning of the series, there is a lot that doesn't really make sense at first, but as you go further in, all of these different realms you're taken to throughout start to spell out a metaphor for the cycle of abuse and trauma. This series isn't too heavy on ultimate dread or anything like that, but there are moments in the series that will just make you straight up question everything you knew previously. It's a pretty solid series overall, and I would recommend you go watch it. The other ARG series I want to talk about is The Backrooms. Now, if I'm being honest, I can make a whole entire separate video from this talking about The Backrooms, but I'll keep it short here. I'll first explain what The Backrooms is, as it's kind of a complicated explanation. In 2019, a post on 4chan was the first mention of The Backrooms. This whole thing started off as a creepypasta, so let me explain it. According to the post, to put it simply, it is explained as the reason why some people go missing is because people will sometimes no-clip out of reality and into an infinite realm of man-made structures known as the Backrooms. Sometimes people escape it, some don't ever come back to the real world. With that is shown a yellow-walled, green carpeted fluorescent office room, kind of ugly looking, but I guess that's the point. Now the Backrooms from there only really gained traction in 2020, but in 2022, a YouTuber known as Kane Pixel uploaded a video called Backrooms Found Footage, which garnered 52 million views. This was the start of what we know now as the Backrooms ARG. And by the way, this is all CGI, which blew my mind the first time seeing this, and not to mention, the dude who made this was a 16-year-old at the time. And the Backrooms ARG takes the initial idea of the original creepypasta and expands on it from there. In the ARG, it mainly tells a story about a corporation getting their hands on something they shouldn't have, as they managed to find a way to open a portal into the Backrooms in the late 80s. Now, as you watch the course of this series play out, it really does start to show that this corporation should not have tried to conquer this realm, as it poses a great danger not only with monsters. I know that sounds lame, but stick with me here. But it poses a great threat to humans simply because the likelihood of someone getting lost in there and just simply starving to death or dying from exposure there is high. We also see the psychological damage that happens to a person when they get lost in the backrooms. As a man named Peter, who was a part of the research team, accidentally got lost while scouting the realm. He went missing for several months, and with that, the corporation had to declare him legally dead. Eventually, Peter was later found. He was alive after all this time, but he wasn't himself. He found a research team and attacked them. One of the scouters of the backrooms was holding a shotgun, and Peter managed to grab the shotgun from him and shoot him in the side. How does that happen? After that, we see a video of the deranged man trying to escape the complex. By this point, it is clear that Peter is suffering from some form of extreme paranoid schizophrenia. He lost his mind trying to find a way out and conspired to kill anyone part of the backrooms research team. He also has lost his entire family, wife, children, who all think he is dead. Peter starts to realize the backrooms weren't a place man was supposed to set foot on, and while he manages to escape the complex afterwards, Peter trips down a hillside. He lands on a sharp rock, killing him instantly. This story Kane has put together is fantastic. It doesn't bother with telling a tale about a haunted office or something lame. He shows the human consequences of digging too far. And while there may be a monster in this series, the real monster of all of this is the human desire to conquer the unknown. And after all of that, do you know what this corporation decides to do about it? Oh, I know. Let's turn the backrooms into a bunch of storage units. That's a great idea, man. Now, the last thing I want to mention about the backrooms before I move on is an interesting discussion I have heard is people saying that adding monsters to the backrooms breaks the illusion of the unknown horror the backrooms was initially supposed to portray. And I do agree with that to an extent. While I do think the monster aspect numbs the psychological terror of being alone, I still think Kane did an excellent job of telling a story of what can happen to someone in those conditions of being completely isolated. And even then, the monster isn't really the main plot to the story either. I think it's probably just supposed to represent a predator that humans weren't meant to uncover. And even then, we still don't know anything about how the backrooms were made, if they ever were. We don't know where the monster came from. Hell, we don't really know what it looks like either. There's no clear shot of him that really exists. So I would still say that the aspect of exploring the unknown overall is still prevalent. With that out of the way, let's get to the conclusion of all of this. With all the explanations of ARGs and all of it, what do I think is the worst ARG? Well, if I had to pick, I would really say it's none of them. None that at least are popular at the moment. There's probably some kid who made their own ARG with like 5 views, but I'm not counting that. Even the ARGs that have lower points still do a good job at encapsulating what they intended. If I maybe had to pick one, it might be Monument Mythos, but like I said, that's only because I think the way its story is told is not in the best manner. So overall, I'd probably say none of them still. And lastly, the best ARG, in my opinion, is the Backrooms. I don't think I've seen a story fleshed out like this in a while. Now, it does again fall into the same premise that a lot of ARGs do as well, but this stands out from all those entirely on its own. This really does go through to show you the real horror of isolation, and it doesn't try super hard to make you scream or anything like that, because honestly, it's just kind of sad. And with that, I have concluded the Backrooms ARG. I seriously recommend you go watch it, as it is seriously impressive, and I mean, again, look at that CGI, it's so realistic. We now end this with one question remaining. Which is better, creepypastas or ARGs? I would personally say it heavily depends, but since I know you guys won't like that answer, I'll go on to say that I think it's ARGs. They aren't as restricted in storytelling nearly as much as creepypastas are, and a lot of them don't follow the plot of, ooh, spooky haunted game. Like I said, I know ARGs have their own issue with a repetitive format, but for the most part, they give it character unlike creepypastas. And don't get me wrong, you can use the limited form of storytelling to make a really good creepypasta, but I would say overall it's a lot more difficult to pull off. The era of creepypastas is dying out, and with that comes new forms of internet horror. Whether bad or good, I'll probably stick around for it. And we now circle back to the beginning of the video. Have you ever tried starting your own video? Whether it be 4 retards in the middle of the forest or making a shoddy podcast, the internet is host to many forms of ideas in horror. And today we explored that and came to the conclusion that Germa will forever haunt my dreams!
Okay, if I chop you up in a meat grinder, and the only thing that comes out that's left of you is your eyeball, you're probably dead!
With that out of the way, thank you for watching, and I bid you farewell. I'll see you next week.